So, uh,
Also, the book, the official publication date for Bad Mexican, Bad American is March 15th, but I'm told that they just printed this week and they're on their way to the University of Chicago Distribution Center, and so they should be on the way within the next couple weeks, I imagine. And we'll also have copies at AWP.
mhm.
So
And
yeah.
Jose, could you tell us, like, explain AWP and where it is? And because I don't know, has anybody gone to AWP?
Well, it changes every year.
Yeah.
This year, it's in Kansas City,
Mhm.
so we're gonna freeze to death. Um, next year it's in Los Angeles.
Oh, that's
Last year it was in not Philly. That was 2 years ago. It was in Seattle. So it changes to a big city every year. It's a place for presses, literary magazines, MFA programs, writers, editors to meet, um, and have readings, have book signings, sell magazines, sell books, and and other activities.
Yeah, it's awesome. If anybody, if you have never gone to an AWP, it's really great to go. You get to see everybody from across the country. You get to, get onto the national scene, which is really cool. So,
And
okay.
it's cool because in my neighborhood, everybody looks at me like the weird literary guy, and at AWP, people actually know who you are. So it's pretty cool. For like a week, you're like famous.
Yeah. Okay, Jose, I'm putting into the let's see. I'm putting into the chat your worksheet as a PDF. Okay. And then
Okay.
I will introduce you. Okay.
Okay,
So
wonderful.
this is Jose Hernandez Diaz, and he's a 2017 and National Endowment of the Arts Poetry Fellow. He's the author of Fire Eater and Bad Mexican, Bad American from Acre Books. It's one that just coming out, and The Parachutist, which is coming from Sundress Publications in 2025. He teaches generative workshops for Hugo House, Lighthouse Writers Workshops, the Writers Center, and elsewhere. Additionally, he serves as a poetry mentor in the Adroit Journal Summer Mentorship Program. So I am thrilled. I am absolutely thrilled to have Jose here today with us. And I think everybody will enjoy this. Jose, would you like to have this screen like you presenting, or would you like to have it like a gallery screen or?
I think gallery's fine.
Okay.
Um, so right now I'm just gonna share the screen. Um, oh, it says host disabled participant screen sharing. So I think you have to go to multiple
Oh,
people can share
okay.
um to
Did,
on the more section.
okay. Did that work?
Let me try it now. Yeah, perfect. Okay, so um okay, there it is. So here's the worksheet. Um, what is this? Okay, that's because I don't pay my Microsoft Word. So prose poetry. The first rule of prose poetry is do not use line break. Right, that's what distinguishes it from poetry, from linear verse. We go to the end of the page like a paragraph, block form. Um, so that's the prose element involved in this hybrid form of literature. Um, so we have poetic elements, alliteration, rhyme, repetition, um, and we have prose elements as well, dialogue, first person, second person at times, rarely, but at times, third person, right? So the man in the Pink Floyd shirt went to the zoo, so you can write with that prose perspective, narrative voice. Um, and that's what drew me to prose poetry was I was reading James Tate and I'd never seen anything like it. It looked like little short stories, or um, it had the third person aspect to it. I was used to writing first person poetry, uh, identity based, linear verse about my real life. And this third person, um, you can create characters, facades, masks, a way to come in disguised into the poem. Um, you can build worlds, and it was, it had the prose element of storytelling and characters, and um, so that was interesting to me. That's how I first started writing prose poetry. At first, I was imitating a lot of who I read, Tate and Ray Gonzalez and different writers, and later on, I started to just discover my own voice, and I had my own references. I had Ode to the Piñata, and I had my own cultural references. A lot of the American surrealists were primarily from the Midwest, or the U.S. and white. So I was able to. At first, I thought, well, do the prose poems, do they have to be universal and not have cultural references? That's mostly what I was reading. But then when I incorporated my own voice and images and references, and I saw that I was still able to pull off the surreal quality and have my own images and setting. So that's when I think it really got exciting for me. We have a list here of some famous prose poets. Tate, I mentioned, Victoria Chang, Claudia Rankin, who wrote Citizen, Ada Limon, and the list goes on there. So the worksheet is longer than what we're going to use, but just so that you can have it, um, this is like a 2-hour worksheet, and we're going to do 1 hour of it. So just so that you can have a little more in depth. With 1 hour, it's a little bit too short for a, prose poetry workshop. So you can have this when you have a little more time. This essay here, um, the link here for the Hannah Huff essay, um, it's about prose poetry history, context, starting off with the French influence, Bertrand, Baudelaire, Rimbaud, and moving to America, Gertrude Stein. And so that history, context, the Hannah Huff essay, 40-minute, 30-minute read. And the Simic essay is more about the art of prose poetry, the subversive quality, the sprezzatura, which is a concept Simic talks about, which is often present in prose poetry, which is an Italian concept of appearing to be nonchalant with art, right? Sort of that cool, nonchalant. It mentions the sprezzatura, which I think is an important part of a lot of good prose poetry, is appearing to be nonchalant and as if it happened sort of by mistake, or without thinking too much, with more of a natural elegance, I think. Um, so that essay also mentions the subversive quality of prose poetry. Um, Prose poetry was not poetry with a capital P, so it was a little bit. There was room for humor, irony, subversive elements, deadpan style, sarcasm, dark humor, dark imagery. So that's the subversive element referenced in this essay. And these notes are just sort of some of the highlights from the essay. The read is like a 15-minute read. It's in Plume magazine, uh, essay by Charles Simic. And he talks about the hardest thing for poets is to free themselves from their own habitual way of seeing the world and find ways to surprise themselves. So with prose poetry, there's a lot of discovery as you write, you know. it has a lot of origins in surrealism. The surrealists back then were using a lot of automatic writing where they would sit down without an axe to grind, without an agenda, and just try to free write their thoughts and see what they came up with. Um, and they would even do techniques like getting a book that's next to them and turning to page 55, third paragraph, picking a random word, and then start writing from that um, improvisation, you know. So there's a lot of spontaneity, which is highlighted and cherished, I think, in prose poetry, and spontaneity. And like I said, sometimes it's the appearance of spontaneity because really you're crafting it out, but you want it to come off as sort of spontaneous and nonchalant. Um, so that's the essays that I usually require for my, or that I usually recommend for my prose poetry workshops. Um, but I think the best way, obviously, to read, to understand prose poetry and to get into that mood of writing with prompts, because we will have a couple prompts at the end of this, um, is to read prose poetry. So this one is Bound in Duty by James Tate. It's from a collection called um, Return to the City of White Donkeys, published in the early 2000s. Does somebody want to read this one? So you don't hear me blabbing all day?
Let's see. I'll do it. Shall I?
Okay,
I'll go first off the board here.
thank you.
Close readings in prose poetry. Bound in Duty by James Tate. I got a call from the White House, from the president himself, asking me if I'd do him a personal favor. I like the president, so I said, sure, Mr. President, anything you like. He said, just act like nothing's going on. Act normal. That would mean the world to me. Can you do that, Leon? Why, sure, Mr. President, you got it. Normal, that's how I'm going to act. I won't let on, even if I'm tortured. I said, immediately regretting that tortured bit. He thanked me several times and hung up. I was dying to tell someone that the president himself called me, but I knew I couldn't. The sudden pressure to act normal was killing me. And what was going on anyway? I didn't know anything was going on. I saw the president on TV yesterday. He was shaking hands with a farmer. What if it wasn't really a farmer? I needed to buy some milk, but suddenly I was afraid to go out. I checked what I had on. I looked, quote, normal to me, but maybe I looked more like I was trying to be normal. That's pretty suspicious. I opened the door and looked around. What was going on? There was a car parked in front of my car that I had never seen before, a car that was trying to look normal. But I wasn't fooled. If you need milk, you have to get milk. Otherwise, people will think something's going on. I got in to my car and sped down the road. I could feel those little radar guns popping behind every tree and bush, but apparently they were under orders not to stop me. I ran into Kirsten in the store. Hey, what's going on, Leon? She asked. She had a very nice smile. I hated to lie to her. Nothing's going on. Just getting milk from my cat, I said. I didn't know you had a cat, she said. I meant to say coffee. You're right. I don't have a cat. Sometimes I refer to my coffee as my cat. It's just a private joke. Sorry, I said. Are you all right? She asked. Nothing's going on, Kirsten. I promise you, everything is normal. The president shook hands with a farmer, a real farmer. Is that such a big deal? I said. I saw that, she said. And that man was definitely not a farmer. Yeah, I know, I said, feeling better.
Wonderful reading. Thank you.
That's like I think I was getting a little abnormal, right? As I was reading it.
Well, it's an abnormal scenario, right? Um, it starts to get almost nightmarish for the speaker in the
Yeah.
poem. Um, so you see here, the language is pretty accessible, right? Um, I think it lulls us in with that everyday quality to it, um, the normal aspect to it. Um, but it starts to intensify as it goes on, um, with unusual scenarios, and it just gets odder and odder, and has short sentences, quick, um, and there's some humor to it as well, right? Some humor, some deadpan style, where things that are not believable are presented as believable. Um, so and it has dialogue too, right? The dialogue back and forth, um, between Leon and Kirsten. So that's prose poetry, right? The hybrid form here. Um, did we like it? Confused by it? What do we think about it?
Yeah, I definitely like it.
Mhm.
What did you like about it?
Well, I liked the use of dialogue and I liked the way it had a kind of continuing story. It doesn't have any places where we as the reader are told to kind of pause. It starts going and then it just like a train, it gains momentum into this kind of nightmarish tunnel.
Yeah, there's momentum, there's a pace to it. It lulls us in, right? To
Yeah.
believe a lot of these otherwise absurd scenarios. It just lulls us in with the language, the approachability of it, the folksy aspect to it, that it just kind of lulls you into. It sounds kind of normal, so maybe it's true, you know. Um,
And I also like when you're talking about accessibility, like this
yeah,
is not a specific country. And I like that it could be anywhere, you know.
yeah,
It's just the president. So, we assume by the word president that it's a democracy or an elected official, but there is this sense of danger and then that little slip of like, even if you torture me. So I think this poem is accessible to anyone on the planet, right?
yeah. And Tate talks about the simple packaging of the prose poem. Um, it seems it's not intimidating to people, right? We've read
Yeah.
paragraphs our whole lives since grade school. So with poetry, linear verse, some of the line breaks are confusing, the use of white space, caesura, and so these different techniques of poetry are a little bit intimidating, right? You kind of have to be like an expert to understand it, a lot of it. And this one, like prose, we can kind of just pick up a novel and get a gist of what's going on, you know, and it's accessible. It's a little easier to penetrate what's going on here. Um,
What's the difference between a prose poem and flash fiction?
that's a great question. A question I always get too. But with me, I try to just say that flash fiction is longer, generally longer, more interested in story and plot, more room for character development, whereas prose poetry is more condensed, right? Less time to explain everything. Sometimes there is fragmentation and disorientation because we're just boom right in the middle of a scene without the setting and everything described in length, like in flash fiction or like fiction, you know. So I think there's just less space for all the little details and more condensed, um, economical language, economy of language. And so I think, you know, less is more in prose poetry. A little bit, you would think that would be easier to write poetry because it's shorter, but sometimes getting just what's essential into a prose poem can be more difficult when you have to cut things out, you know.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome.
Hi. Um,
Love.
Hi. Where is the poetry in this prose poem?
Well, that's a
Mountain
good
Beauty.
That's a good question. And well, you know, Tate didn't necessarily call them prose poems, and it's a hybrid form. Some prose poems lean more prose, some prose poems lean more poetry. To me, the condensed language is what's poetic about it. The flow of it, the way it lulls you in. But yeah, this one you could probably say it's leaning prose, right? Um,
Uh-huh.
but
Yeah,
yeah,
like
it's not.
I don't see rhyme, rhythm, alliteration, metaphor, um, or yeah, I don't see this, right? So I'm not
Yeah,
drawn into it as reading a prose poem rather than as reading just plain prose.
yeah, that's the difficult thing, and myself included. I don't put labels on my work. I think it's hybrid work.
Yeah.
I don't really like weigh it out. Like, oh, this part has to be more poetic. But yeah, it's a fair question. You know, it doesn't seem to be poetic at all to me. Like I said, has to do with working in a condensed form, the musicality and the way the language lulls you in with the simplicity of it. But yeah, technically we don't have metaphor. We don't have alliteration, right? Rhyme, you don't see a lot of rhyme in poetry nowadays, but yeah, it's not superficially poetry,
Or
but
even imagery or that type of thing.
I was thinking, like, it seems to me, it seems lyric that you're kind of like keep going around the same thing, like you like a lyric poem, like an ode or something. This sort of seems like it keeps working on different levels, the same thing. Like I've got to act normal, and to me, that's kind of another level to this, which makes it more of a like a poem. If does that make sense? Does that sound?
yeah, I mean, there's repetition and a circular aspect to it. But like I said, these that's why every time I talk about prose poetry, your head just starts spinning because there's not really a clear definition of it. Um, can't really be put down to an exact label. Alana, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I do see kind of a subtext and a playfulness of language that I think is also poetry with like, oh, it had me, I think it was like, it's killing me. And there was one other reference to, let's see, I hung up, I was dying to tell someone. So there's like all of this, and I'm not going to be a fool. There was like this language that led to a subtext of what the speaker is thinking might happen, right? Or could be happening with this kind of, and then we don't even know if this was a real interaction, right? Like this could be some kind of fantastical thing that's going on. So I like the mystery and the idea that the language, there's a tortured, right? There's a lot of language in here that is at play that might also be in prose, but I think that's also makes it poetic because there could be a lot of metaphor or, going on with that language.
And I think also like the haiku is stripped down, right? And Chinese classical poetry is stripped down. It's not ornate. It's not poetic in the sense of like very, very ornate. It's more simplified. So I think there's the art of that, the art of condensed language, the art of stripped down language. So that's what I see as poetic. But yeah, it's not as clear. Like oh, roses are red, violet. It's not as easy to define as poetic.
Musical.
It's more like philosophical, you know. There's a lot of people with their hands up right now. Regina. Oh,
Hi,
yeah.
how are you?
Hi. Good. How are
Um,
you?
um, this is interesting because when coming into this, I was thinking about prose poetry in one way, like what I, have heard people maybe say before that, what really is the difference, like just looking at it on the page, just, that initial assessment, you're like, oh, what is this? A short story or whatever. But as I went through it, it hit me the the way that this style of poetry lends itself to, I think, other performative aspects that you don't necessarily see when you're just reading it on the page, but when you I kind of process things in my head or whisper them out loud to myself, and I'm like, oh, I can actually, it broadened it for me. And if you're trying to gain access to an audience that has kind of typically said, you know, I'm not into poetry, this really is this is like a, I don't know, a gateway drug.
A
Yeah,
gateway, right?
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly.
So like, cause like when I read it, I immediately went into like performance head. You know, I got a call from the White House, from the president himself, asking me if I'd do him a personal favor. You know, so it becomes this storytelling wonderful thing that I think happens when you approach it in that way.
Yeah, and there's a
That
like
makes
the way
any
you read
sense.
it, there's a pace to it, right?
Yes,
There's sort of a subtle pace to it when you read
right.
it, a rhythm to it, the way it lulls you in.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Bruce.
Yeah, what I notice here, there's a lot of technique involved because the end of the lines, the enjambment, is really just throws you forward. This thing moves syntactically very quickly down the page, and that's, I think, one of its real strengths is the way he kind of works a sentence and the lines and breaks them at different points. So there's always this sort of thrusting you forward into the narrative, and so I think although it doesn't have rhyme and it may not have, it has a lot of images that get repeated, but it has that syntactical trajectory that keeps it moving.
Certainly, and they tend to be short sentences, short lines. Like you said, it's moving forward, the momentum of it, the pace of it, the energy of it. It's quick and it's keeping you guessing, keeping you on your toes, trying to shock you, you know, and it's elusive, right?
Yeah, it has
Um,
articles at the end of a line and has has a pronoun at the end of the line. I mean, it has words that you normally wouldn't break syntactically, but if you do, it throws you immediately into the next line. So and then there's some end stops with important points like fooled and some other places down below where he wanted you to pay attention to that word and language. So I think there's a lot of intentionality to this.
Wonderful. Lee Francis, did you have your hand up?
Yes, hi, this is Liza.
Hi.
Sorry, that's my husband's name. I didn't realize his name. Anyways, yes, I love this poem. I think what is like kind of like what Regina was saying, that it kind of draws you in. I think it does something that poetry does for me, which is it gives the reader an idea that, like, you know, maybe you're mulling over afterwards, because you're kind of like, most people don't get a call from the White House, and not from the president. So you're kind of like, wait, what's going on? But then it leaves you with this idea also, but like, well, what would I do if this was my situation? And then it also gives us the sense of like, how much in our country, how much in our world goes on, and we just act normal, that nothing is going on. Oh, there's 2 wars, there's 3 wars. Oh, there's, a shooting over here. Oh, there's climate chaos. Oh, there's this, there's all these things, and we're just acting normal. So what does it mean to act normal in this kind of, sudden, assignment of just act normal. Okay. Just act normal. And so it left me thinking like, well, oh, wow, that's what we do anyways. But it also, it's a poem, so it's allowing me to play. I can also be like, oh gosh, I can almost feel my own like, uncomfortability grow here, right? And then it's like, but it's just a poem, it's just a story. I can fall back on that, and that's okay. So I can kind of go in and out of it in the best kind of way. And I really appreciate that. On my comment, I also just wanted to ask you a question, because a lot of prose poetry that I've read is like in that paragraph form, and this one is more line breaks that are interesting line breaks.
It looks like it has line breaks, huh? Yeah.
Yeah, could you
Yeah.
talk a little bit about the form right
From
here?
what I understand, prose poetry, like I said, number one rule is going to the end of the page. But some of the publishers, they like to manipulate the margins so that it appears to be more poetic in like half of the page, because they think that it's rather artless, the look of the prose poem to the end of the page. So in his book, they manipulated the margins to break at a certain point, and so that it looks more presentable like a poem, because some people are turned off by just blocks of writing to the end of the page, like prose, Like, for example, I had a poem that I wrote to the end of the page called The Parachutist, and it got published in The Nation. And when they published it just like this. They manipulated the margins, and it was only to half of the page because that's their house style. You know, it looks more poetic, and some people do not like the way that a prose poem looks. They think anybody can do that, you know. So from what I understand, they take a prose poem to the end of the page and they manipulate the margins. And you could do it on your computer, you know, with I'm not too good at it, but I've seen people do it where they manipulate the margins and it's like a box like type of poem. Does that make sense at all?
Mhm.
Okay. Yeah, but you talked about the subversive quality, the edge to the poem. It sort of feels like you're reading something like um, chaotic, right? And like you're witnessing a car crash or something. So it's subversive, and like you said, there's simple packaging, but there's bigger social questions about what's normal, conformity, right? So like Tate talked about, prose poems often in simple packaging, approachable, but it lets us incorporate our art and our social criticisms and our satire, irony. Um, so we have to get going to the next one because we're gonna get the prompts in as well. Um, let me see. So the next one is the education, Shivani Mehta. Everything I know about mourning, I learned from my father, a professional mourner like his father before him. He knew 33 different ways of appearing desolate. Most people only know 4. We lived above the mortuary. The corpses never bothered me. They were easy to get along with and didn't mind the dark. We went to funerals every day. My father was the best mourner. Sometimes he even told jokes. A man walks into a morgue and starts shooting. When he leaves, everyone's still dead. One of the great benefits of our work, we never had to worry about food. It was always catered. There was usually baked brie, pate, I can't say that, on toast points, 2 different kinds of champagne. My father said his favorite part of a funeral was the women. They always smiled at him as they walked by in their black silk dresses, made him think of sailboats on a summer night, gliding on the water.
Mhm.
Does this one feel a little more poetic?
Yes.
The ending does, right? The ending.
Yes.
Sailboats on a summer night, gliding on the water. But still, it's maybe a little bit more prosy, huh? Leaning a little more prose. But yeah, we have the condensed language here. There's a rhythm pace to it, musicality to it. What do we think about this one? Definitely has some dark imagery, right? Um, Mixed in with playfulness, right?
The corpses never bothered me. They were easy to get along with and didn't mind the dark. I felt that was leaning in on a metaphor.
Yeah. Yeah, it's sort of symbolic, metaphoric of just the mourning of life, right? The difficulties of life, melancholy in general. Um, it's symbolic of a lot of um, the mortuary is symbolic of that. Living by a mortuary is symbolic of sort of the existential quality of life, the drudgery. Regina?
Sorry, I got caught up looking at the thing. So it strikes me that it is imperative in prose poetry to like that first line has to hit hard and be a little bit disconcerting. You know what I'm saying? It is so in that, you know, you just kind of roped into it.
Kind of off the wall, huh?
Yeah, you know, like you just can't come in and say today was a good day, you know. You know, there is some art, some kind of poetic something. I think that has to happen in that first line.
I
Um,
will say that this specific worksheet is focusing on strange, surreal prose poetry. So
Right.
there are more autobiographical prose poems that are more everyday, maybe less dark, less subversive, less surreal, less
Right.
strange. So they're more like everyday narrative poems.
It strikes me that I have written some prose poetry. I just never called it that, never thought about it as that. It was just,
Yeah.
Yeah, like the first line of a poem in my book, The Fire Talker's Daughter, it goes, "My mother talked the fire out of burns, healed the pain." And like, anything that I've ever written like that,
That sounds like one of these lines, right?
right. That's what made
First
me,
lines.
yeah.
Yeah, and you know what's great? Before I really discovered prose poetry, I always wanted to be a short story writer. So my poetry did have the element as well of like storytelling. So when I discovered it, and then it was shorter, so there was like the art of brevity that I was already a fan of with my interest in haiku and Chinese classical poetry. So when I discovered prose poetry, I just started writing a lot of it because I discovered a new form, a new outlet, a new vehicle, a new a new canvas where I could take on these micro poems, so and incorporate some of the elements of prose and storytelling as well. Let's get to the first prompt, just because we're running out of time. So for our first prompt, write a prose poem about meeting a famous figure for coffee, beer, tea, etc. Who do you meet? Are they alive, deceased, someone from history, someone from art history, someone from political history? What is the setting? Tip, it helps to have the setting be familiar to you. Like here I have Venice Beach. You can see the first poem, prose poem, I put my first draft. The first 10-15 minutes I wrote it, and then the second version is the final version. And I'll go ahead and read it. This summer I was good friends with Salvador Dali and Diego Maradona. I was having coffee with Salvador Dali and Diego Maradona at a hippie coffee shop in Venice Beach one summer. So that's like Regina was talking about, right? This is already off the wall.
Right.
Like there's some subversive quality. The first line gets you right away, or like throws you off a little bit. Dali insisted on having black tea. He said he already is drugs or something subversive. They both said I sounded American. Well, I was born in America, I tell them, but I'm Latino, Mexican American, I say. I asked Dali who his favorite soccer team is. La Barcelona, he says, as he examines the marigolds on the coffee table. I asked Maradona who is his favorite painter. La Frida Kahlo, he says. After we finish our coffees, we walk along the Venice coast. Suddenly, Maradona dives into the ocean. He swims alongside a dolphin and a local surfer. Dolly and I laugh out loud. Later, we lay on the sand and watch the sunset. At the end of the night, the moon comes up like a seagull on a street lamp. We go to a well, there's a more poetic element there, right? In terms of we're talking about like what's prose, seagull on a street lamp. We go to a local bar called The Clam and talk politics and literature with local lady surfers. Also the alliteration there, right? Literature with local lady surfers. I tell them my name is Roberto Duran, former world champion. We have a good laugh as we drink our Mexican beers and dance the night away to cumbias. So, and it helps to kind of know that Dali and Diego Maradona are like iconic figures, but they're also kind of off the wall figures, right? Which kind of plays into their characters, right? Both of them. So it kind of plays into this Venice Beach and which Venice Beach obviously being famous for eccentric personalities. So that helps to kind of know that as you read the poem. So for the prompt, write a prose poem where you meet one or two people. Are they iconic figures? Are they contemporary figures? Are they historic figures? Are they art people? Where do you meet them? What goes on? What's the dialogue? You get along? Do you have an argument? what's the setting. So we'll do this prompt for 7 minutes or so, 5-10 minutes, and I'll come back and check in. Well, we're kind of running out of time here, but hopefully you got the beginnings of a poem, of a draft. We kind of got a lot into an hour, so thank you for your patience.
Yeah, this has been really wonderful, Jose. It's,
My
thank you
pleasure.
so much. Thank you so much. Maybe, is it okay if does everybody have this, we can stop the share and see everybody, and we want to like give you a big round of applause and
Okay, let me try to. How do I stop the share?
there's the green button.
Oh, there it is. Sorry, there it is. Okay, there we go.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Great
So-
workshop. Thank you.
Yeah, and
Thank
we
you.
give them a big old, lots of love here, huh? Yeah.
Thank
And
you.
there are
And,
lots of comments in the chat, so check those out.
wonderful.
Thank you, Jose.
And say hello,
Thank
and
you.
if you go to AWP as well.
Yes, thank you so much, Jose. This was really awesome.
My
Appreciate it.
pleasure. Thank you.
I'm
Take
looking
care.
forward to your new book. It's going to be released soon, right?
Yes, thank you. Hopefully,
Awesome.
they start arriving soon.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Take care.
Okay.
All right. Thank you. All right, everybody. So I guess this is time to say goodbye, right? We could stop our recording, but